Hello from Diplomatic Language Services, and welcome to our podcast, Language Matters. We make language accessible to everyday people by discussing features which may not exist in other languages. I'm your host, Molly Sampson. Welcome to the second episode of Language Matters. This is Molly, the Director of Language Programs at DLS. I'm joined today by two native speakers of Mandarin Chinese. First is Christina Hayes. Ni hao, Christina.
Ni hao.
She's the Language Training Supervisor for African and Asian Languages. And I also have Cecilia Go. Ni hao, Cecilia.
Ni hao.
And she's the Language Training Coordinator and a Chinese teacher here at DLS. So I think the first question that most people have about Chinese who aren't very familiar with it is, how does the character system work? And when I say character system, I mean the writing system.
As we all know, Chinese written language is not based on phonetic system. Instead, we have individual characters where some people might think they all look like pictures. Some of them are developed from pictures, while most of the characters are actually made by a sound part and a description shape radical. So
can you talk about what you mean by radical?
Radicals are basically simpler original characters represent a category of objects. For example, water radical, you see the 3 dots, which represent anything about water. You see the water radical in characters such as wet or to dip in, things like this. You will see the fire radical, which itself is also a character, but you will see this fire radical in...
You see the fire radicals in like to burn, to cook, to barbecue,
yes.
Things like that.
I see. So that's you have the basic elements, which mean fire, and then you have some other lines or shapes around that particular radical to mean something else.
Correct.
I see.
Right.
I see.
And each character is one syllable for, pronunciation wise. But people are constantly confused with, is this a character or it's a word? So the most question I got asked by beginner Chinese students is this a word? No, this is a character, or this is a 2-character word. So, and a great example of we had was triangle and the pentagon. So in Chinese, triangle we say 3-side shape, and pentagon we say 5-side shape. So instead of creating new words, we just switch out the key element and
we form new compound words.
So a triangle and a pentagon will be like a 3-character word.
right.
But each character has its own essential meaning.
Right. You can also pull out those characters with other words to form another word. So if you pull out the 3 character in triangle and put it with week, 星期, so we'll say 星期三, which means Wednesday.
So it's the 3rd day of the week.
Right.
Yes.
I see.
But not all characters carry a original meaning. Most characters do, but we also have characters that it need to stay within a word. For example, the word grape, 葡萄. If you say 葡 by itself, there's no meaning. So very, very few examples like this in Chinese. Like it's still a lesson for me to learn, to research how we got those very special words.
I see. So for new words, so for example, computer. A computer is a new thing, or cars are, not new, but they're modern things. How do you account for those when if you don't have do you use a different radical, or do you have a new system that uses it to show it's a new kind of word, or it's a borrowed word?
That's a very interesting question. So for modern concepts that got into Chinese society, a good example, you just made a good example, the word computer. We, instead of creating new words, we actually use descriptional words to form a new name for this new item, right? We say the calculating machine
Oh, okay.
to mean computer, because originally computer PCs were for calculating machine, right? And we also do transliteration words, either entirely or partially. For example, we might say the location names. Washington, we say 华盛顿, which is 100% transliteration.
So what are the characters of? I'm not going to say it, but Washington. What are the characters that
Washington.
make up Washington?
We tend to choose a set of characters that carries very neutral meaning. Because if we choose the character 花, hua means flower. We try to avoid characters with strong meanings, right?
I see.
So we choose the word 花, which is more just a nice meaning. 华盛顿, 顿 doesn't really have any meaning. It just means a pause, right? We also do partial transliteration. For example, Starbucks. We choose to translate the star part, but keep the box. We say 星巴克, star and bak.
I see.
Another example is internet. So the inter part is transliteration. We say inter, and net we have an actual word for it. So we'll say interwang.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see. So Wang
Wang means
net.
net.
is net.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So for non-native speakers, or for when children are learning Chinese, maybe it's different, maybe it's the same, but how do they know how to pronounce the characters?
So because Chinese language, the spoken language and the written language are completely not associated in terms of sounds, right? So children have to memorize the pronunciation of each character.
Okay, so let's relate this to English. Do you have anything equivalent to when children learn to read? You can have a phonetic system that they can then pair with the characters as they memorize them.
So we do have a system called Pinyin in mainland China, just to help our kids or non-native, or people who want to learn the language to start with. But this is not the real language. This is just a phonetic system that helps
a tool
us
for people to learn
right.
the character system.
So, what does Pinyin look like?
It's made by 26 letters.
So it's Romanized.
Romanized.
It's the same alphabet we use in English.
Yes.
Right.
With different order, of course. With our phonetic, the vowel, and then we get into the consonants. So it's not like A, B, C, D order, but
Right.
the same letters.
And to answer your question, yes, our kids do go to school and learn Pinyin first. And then it won't take long, like 2-3 weeks, but simultaneously basic characters are introduced. So for the first 200-300 basic characters, they just have to memorize it. And with your vocabulary pool expanded, so you might guess, but not 100% right sometimes. Right.
I see. And that's also how non-native speakers would also learn Pinyin first, along with paired with the basic characters.
Correct.
Yes. So,
But you cannot read in Pinyin. So if someone gave you a whole transcription of Pinyin, you couldn't really read it. You'd have to say it.
you can read it because Pinyin.
But it's not a natural thing.
It's not a natural thing because each pronunciation, even though with the same pronunciation, same tone, it still might match 10 or 20 characters.
So if I were given an article in Pinyin, I will really slow down and figure out the context and try to bring back the characters in order to comprehend it.
I see. So one thing related to that is a lot of people ask me how you type in Chinese.
So there are different programs, input programs. Most people, as far as I know, they use the Pinyin system to type. Right.
I see. So what happens if I type PU? What happens? I don't see PU. What do I see?
You will see a bunch of selections of characters that have this pronunciation, but probably with the order of most commonly used characters to the least used characters.
And then I just select the correct character
Yeah.
once I type.
Yeah, I know some character input tools are based on radicals. I tried to use that before, but it takes too long to remember all the components. Like on the keyboard, A might represent more than 10 or 20 radicals. So you will need to constantly try to visually think about the character you want to type, and then still you end up with multiple options, and you still need to select which character to go into it.
I see. Well, Christina, you mentioned a couple minutes ago tones. So English does not have any tones. Can you talk a little bit about how those work, what that means, how difficult it is for English speakers to produce them?
So there are 4 tones together with a neutral tone. Some people will agree, Chinese got 5 tones. Some people say, well, really just 4 tones with a neutral tone. I would say among all the students we know and we taught, it seems like there's not a very obvious pattern what kind of student will get the tone more accurate, more correct.
And I always told my students, your tones won't get perfect until like you lived in China for 5 or 10 years. Because you can tell for people who lived in China, when they come back for training or class, their tones are usually better than those who have never been to China. And of course, like music instrument help a lot since this is a tonal language.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of the 4 tones or the 5 tones, whichever?
So first tone is like high pitch flat one. We go with ah. That's the first tone, flat. Second tone goes from like it's a rising tone. You start with lower pitch and rise the tone, so it goes ah. So the third tone is a little bit twisted, so you go ah. And the fourth one, you start from the higher place and goes down, which is ah.
And is there a 5th one?
The 5th one is like a neutral one, like ah, like
I see.
really like light.
I see. So can you give us some words that can be confused between the different tones? So we can hear it in context?
So if we combine the consonant M with ah, so ma, first tone, means mom. Ma, right? That's universal. But if we say, if we put consonant M with ah, which is the third tone, ma, which means horse.
Like,
Riding a horse.
oh, horse. Okay. As opposed
Riding
to
a horse.
the other word that we won't talk anymore about. So what if you put a different tone? Are there any more? With
So if we put second tone, ma, like
Could be tingling.
tingling or numb.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Keep in mind, even though when Cecilia is saying ma, it could still match multiple characters, which
Right.
they will carry their own
Right.
meaning. Yeah.
So can you say that word 4 times with different tones?
Ma, 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 ma.
Can you tell the difference?
The end 2, I can't really tell the difference.
Ma, ma.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I imagine in context it would be very hard to discern. So, okay. So, in speaking of pronunciation tones, a lot of the other questions that we get or have gotten are about dialects or different languages. So, a lot of people know that there are 2 languages, Mandarin and Cantonese. So, if you want to start there with the differences between Cantonese and Mandarin, are they mutually understandable?
No, I would say unless someone lived in another community for a long time, it will be.
But
much
I mean,
easier
if
for
you're a
them.
Cantonese speaker and I'm a Mandarin speaker, we will not
Naturally,
be speaking
we
the same
won't
language.
be able to understand each other.
What if we write to each other?
If we write to each other, I think it's communicatable. For daily level, the more survival daily level it is, maybe it's harder to understand because the too many slang words. But as soon as it get into news or something formal, then we actually share almost identical grammar and identical.
So if
Written
a
system.
Cantonese speaker can read a Mandarin newspaper and a Mandarin speaker can read a Cantonese newspaper.
Yes, because I would say 99% is actually exactly the same.
Formal language is the same. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the other dialects, maybe within Mandarin and within mainland China and some of the other places that you...
So I grew up speaking a dialect. So dialect was more spoken outside the school, with my parents, with my friends. You go to supermarket, we speak the dialects. So I picked up Mandarin in school. As we mentioned, started with pinyin. One of the reasons is in most of the dialect, there are some sounds we're not aware of. For example, for my dialect, we don't distinguish N and L. So I didn't realize there's a difference until I was in school and started with the phonetic system pinyin, and I know that there was a difference. So just an example regarding dialect.
I'll say maybe 80% of the family at home, they speak their own sort of dialect or with their own accent. Not a lot of people grew up only speaking a standardized Mandarin.
So how different... So if you were to speak your dialect to Christina, and you have kind of very standard Mandarin, correct?
Yeah, I would like to think so.
Okay. It's just a matter of where you grew up. If you speak the dialect from your area, can she understand you?
40% if I'm
that's
really
it?
slow and
Yeah.
don't use any slang and just make it like standardized.
Right.
Yeah.
The difference is between you're from Sichuan, right? Between her dialect and the Putonghua, the standardized the Mandarin language. The differences between these two are not that significant. So if they speak slower, we will be able to understand.
So
But
maybe
for,
it's
for
like
Cantonese,
somebody...
we won't be.
Maybe somebody like from Scotland or something for an American.
Maybe.
So if they speak slowly, but if they're in a very heavy Scottish accent, I can't understand.
You could compare in that way. You could in
Yeah.
a certain way.
I
Yeah.
see.
And and the Scottish English speaker has to speak with a musical tone system. It's almost like that. I'm just giving you an example.
Oh, okay. I see. So are there dialects? So I imagine in some places, some of them are more different than this
Right.
40%.
Right.
One.
Yep.
Okay. And then the last question is about the tenses. So I've heard that you deal with tenses very differently, especially just basic past, present, and future. So can you talk a little bit about how you distinguish time frames in the language?
So we don't conjugate words. We don't conjugate verbs. We don't conjugate noun. Not only we don't have tenses, we also don't have plural or any other forms. For tenses, we use particles to indicate if this action has been completed or just started. It's a pending status or a completed status. So we use status to communicate about the timeline.
So what's
Does
a
that
what's
make
a
sense?
particle? Is it like just a small sound kind of thing?
So most common particles about status or tense are considered. We have three maybe. Le, which means this action has been completed. I have 过, which means you have this experience. You can relate this one with the perfect tense. We also have the word or particle 会, which means will, be going to. So
And do you tack it onto, every particle is tacked onto the verb
yes,
or just in the sentence?
either before or after the verb.
Okay, so you can do both.
You can do both. Depends
either.
on the different.
Not both either, right?
You
One
can
of them.
do either. Also, sometimes we use the particle le, the completed action particle, maybe at the end of the sentence. So the position of those particle words will make the meaning really different.
And structure-wise, we really emphasize the time marker. So we always throw the time marker at the very beginning of the sentence. So I start the sentence like, yesterday, I went to the supermarket.
So you prepare people in advance.
Right.
Right.
So they don't miss the key information.
Right. So, to us, when we learn English, we actually don't see the point of conjugating verbs because.
Well, when I learn English, I don't see the point of conjugating them either. But
So, give you an example. We will say, yesterday I call you, you no answer. To us, it's very clear what happened, right? So.
it was very clear in English too. I understand.
Right. So
Yeah.
maybe we should
It's
just
a more
drop all the-
advanced
Yes.
language. So, okay. So that was for my major questions. The last thing I'd like you to share is an interesting saying, proverb, or phrase, one of your favorites that doesn't translate well into English, but you like or connotes something interesting in Chinese.
Okay, I'm gonna start with an idiom. So a lot of Chinese idiom are very like you can see a picture and they usually have a connotation meaning, which you have to think like twice about it. So this one is called 学海无涯, which means the sea of the knowledge or sea of the learning process has no limit, has no edge. So which means you have to keep going like so which means you have to keep learning and equip yourself with the most updated information.
Which we're doing today. Christina?
For me, let me pick 三必有我师. 3 people walking together, one must be in certain area, must be able to be my teacher. So this expression is trying to educate people, no matter how knowledgeable you are in your own area. Some other people might know something more than you in some other area. So just
This
keep
is-
you being more humble.
Yeah, this is from Confucius as
Yeah.
well, and this is what we do today too.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Language Matters. To our listeners, you can continue the conversation by tweeting us at DiplomaticLS, or you can find us on Facebook by searching for Diplomatic Language Services. Thank you, and
再见。
谢谢。